Okay, welcome back everybody. Welcome back to this lecture series. Let me just start out by taking you back to last week's session and reminding you of Barbara's input, focusing on the different groups encompassed in higher education. We talked about students, we talked about the staff, faculty, subcontractors, and their specific needs. Barbara's research results immediately in it's an applied approach she follows. It results in policies and their implementation. I think it was very interesting to talk to her. How do you actually do diversity? Not only research diversity, but only do diversity and implement it at institutions like universities, etc. I'm just going to pick up on one point she raised, and she raised that very strongly, which is the question of visibility. Let me remind you that she asked us not to focus on the victim, but focusing on the institution, shifting the focus from individuals to institutions, and that results in quite a high task that she phrased in the end. We need to change paradigms. We need to shift paradigms, and also maybe reconsider our diversity module. I thought it was very, very interesting how she talked about terminology like inclusion, acceptance, tolerance, which actually reproduce hegemony of difference. And we might need a model that's less paternalistic and shares agency more widely. As you can see, all these tasks are no small endeavor, and we're very lucky that we have two more experts talking to us today about this topic. And I will hand over to Dirk, who will introduce Flora Di Donato and Francesca Scamadella.
Yes, welcome also from my side. Thanks for being with us again for this lunch lecture series. I hope you brought your brown bag with you, and it's a pleasure to have two colleagues now from our partner university in Naples, Federico II. And it's also a pleasure to have two legal scholars with us. I mean, it's not only coming together of these different AURORA universities, but also, of course, an interdisciplinary undertaking. What we have here, people from very different disciplinary backgrounds coming together to talk about these issues here of diversity in higher education. Francesca Scamadella and Flora Di Donato, they are both associate professors at the law department at the University of Naples, Federico II. They have a very international profile, and they might even say something more about that by themselves a little bit later. Flora studied in Salerno and did her PhD work in Neuchâtel and Naples, and also taught at not only in Salerno, but also at American universities at NYU and American University in DC. Francesca studied, amongst other places, at Geneva, as far as I can see it. Is that right, Francesca? And they have both a very high profile in their background is basically in legal sociology and philosophy of law. I think they will explain to us a little bit later what actually clinical legal education means, because I had no idea what that is. But that's also part of interdisciplinary undertakings to learn about these other disciplines. And as we already said, they are both experts and focusing in their work very much on law and migration. And that brings us to another, as Silke already said, to another interesting point, of course, when it comes to diversity in higher education, and obviously a very pressing subject, of course, not only subject, but reality, I guess, in Italy, especially southern Italy, also when it comes to migration and the challenges of migration, and also in the framing of law, and when it comes to diversity at universities. So it's a pleasure to have you with us. The title of your talk is Clinical Legal Education as a Path Towards Social Inclusion. And with that, I hand it over to you.
Okay. Thank you. So first, Flora and me would like to thank our colleagues, particularly Dirk, Silke, and Christian, for this opportunity to be part in this AURORA lecture series, which have a relevant role for our and the European higher education. So thank you for this opportunity to share with us our research and to the possibility to discuss our ideas and our methodology. Our presentation is will be divided into 4 parts plus conclusions. I'm going to present the first 2 parties, which actually provide for a general and more theoretical frame, trying also to clarify what is a clinical legal education. And this theoretical frame can be considered as a general framework where we can describe our topics and researches we made and we are still making also with our students, while Flora will illustrate some practical legal cases which she has been analyzed, and other practical activities we made with our students in our classes. So the general frame where we can fit our presentation, our topics, we are going to discuss, so included the analysis, the cases analysis Flora will illustrate later, is given by global transformation happening over the past 3 decades. As we know, globalization has deeply changed our world, transforming economic, political, social, and cultural relationships. I would like to point out how we all live under 2 opposite forces. On one side, the syndrome of the so-called global village. It means that we are shifting over national boundaries, so in a kind of supranational context. On the other and opposite side, we look for local experiences also given by our culture. So put in other terms, globalization is determining simultaneously mechanisms of inclusion and exclusion from network, groups, cities, and so on. One of the most relevant effects of this transformation concerns the notions of culture, identity, and diversity, which have strongly changed. Transnational flows, the network, the informalized economy, flows especially due to migration, new discriminations and inequalities affecting, above all, poor, indigent, and vulnerable people, racism and social exclusion, are transforming these 3 categories, looking for a better and deeper understanding. One of the main effects can be described in terms of lost identities. Some scholars, like for example Crouch in a book of 2019, argue that one of the main effects of globalization is the loss of identity, meant as a membership to a group. It is happening, for example, to the American workers that have lost their work, or in Germany, where German people are invoking the idea of Heimat, motherland, or in France, where French farmers are increasing because of the multinational companies' power. In this context, populist wings and right-wing political parties have arisen, in Italy too, and are gaining ground. For these political parties, immigration is a problem because immigration is a danger for the national identity of countries which host immigrants. So we imagine immigration like a web that intersect these three categories: culture, identity, diversity. Our presentation aims to focus on transformation of these categories by using this specific perspective, that of immigration. Why it's so important to focus on this issue, and why immigration can work as a web that intersecate these three concepts, trying also to capture the transformation that are affecting these three concepts. First, as concerns the issue of immigration, it is important to stress the adaptive processes that migrants live in the hosting community and which affect their own cultural identity. The process can be analyzed from a double perspective. First, the pressure to social integration in the hosting community, and the way in which migrants develop a kind of resistance to a full cultural integration process. In fact, to be involved in a cultural adaptation process needs a cognitive and emotional reorganization of migrants' own identity. It means to be involved in norms, ideologies, values. From this perspective, cultural identity is a resource, but also a barrier to the social integration process. Is a resource because it can help individuals by preserving them from a psychological disease, enemy, and existential disorientation. But on the other side, cultural identity could affect the cultural adaptive processes, both for the first generation of migrants and the second one. In fact, for the first generation migrants, autobiographic memory and culture, personal culture from the country they come from, may affect their social and cultural integration, developing a kind of resistance. While, as concerns the second generation migrants, especially when they suffer social exclusion, migrants can use traditional culture of their family back to construct, to develop oppositive rules and identities. So, why these topics should be interesting for academics people, for scholars, for us? Because we train students. So, because students will become future lawyers, future judges, future social workers, cultural mediators, and so on. So, immigration as a good perspective to observe and to reflect about transformation affecting cultural identity and diversity seems to ask us how we are training our students, how we are training our citizens, how we are training future professionals. Let's start quickly the second part concerning clinical legal education. So trying to answer to the question. Well, what is clinical legal education? It's a methodology, it's an approach to law based on the idea that law students should be given the opportunity to see legal operation as doctors in medical school can. This sentence comes from Jerome Frank, a just realist in the 1932. Clinical legal education as methodology that's try to combine theoretical and practical aspects of the legal practice has three main goals. First, increase experiential learning despite the formalistic, so the positivistic tradition, show the human side of the administration of justice, and third, legalize, making justice accessible for all people, especially for vulnerable, indigent, and poor people. The clinical legal education approach is based on 3 pillars: the theory of case, social justice, pedagogical instance. The theory of case, according to Bill Miller, is the detailed and coherent story of what happened. So it is represented by facts. What happened when a client goes to a lawyer, when a lawyer goes to a court. It's because they have to narrate, to present some facts happening in the past, but they must have the ability to recall these facts in the present in order to present them to the judge, to an arbiter, to the court. So the theory of a case is built by lawyer and clients, as Flora will explain, within a collaborative relationship. Second, the access to justice. It concerns how and why to vulnerable and or indigent people is often denied to access to the justice, or why for these people, for these categories of people, is very hard to access the access to justice. Third, the pedagogical frame. I'm going to stress this pillar because it is the general instance concerning the training way in which students are called to experience the clinical legal education. It is based on a very practical approach, learning by doing method, which literally means that the students can learn something about the legal system and law only by experience and practically using it. So not a theoretical way, just studying on books or codes. This recalls us the distinction between Roscoe Pound made between law in action, law in books, or law in books and law in facts. So the way lawyer learning by doing tell us that the best way in which students can learn something about law is to understand how law is applied. So not only studying codes or books, but experience concretely by using law itself. So with the clients, for example, or with the legal acts. So my last slides is an attempt to stress a pedagogical frame because it represents a framework within students are called to learn under the supervision of their professor, lawyers, judges, also NGO, social workers. It means that law students should experience a legal case in terms of a real story that they can narrate. And it also means that they can feel clients not only as a legal problem to be solved, but above all, as a person, as a human being, keeping emotion, problems, competencies. The pedagogical frame tells us that students learn, allows us that students learn through having responsibility for clients. Students, as future lawyers, judges, and so on, should feel their responsibility for clients, for their clients, for people, for persons. It also strongly guards the role of the university because it practically concerns the way in which the high formation works. The teaching in particular pays attention to emotion, narration, empathy, and not only skill or theoretical knowledge. It also aims to train students by using a critical, original, and reflexive approach, also toward the legal system. So not a mere acceptance, a passive acceptance of the legal system, but they have to develop a critical behavior towards a critical reflection, a critical approach toward the legal system. Finally, it tells us to take law as a creative process. So Flora can continue, and then I finish with the conclusion. Thank you for the moment.
Many thanks, Francesca. Many thanks to our guests for this kind of opportunity to share our research. So in this part, I will provide same cases analysis based on this idea of collaborative lawyering. What does it mean? Clinical scholars, since the publication of Gerard Lopez's book in 1992, entitled Rebellious Lawyering, started to launch this idea that lawyers and clients should collaborate together in solving problems, in framing problems. The idea is to avoid any kind of asymmetries in this kind of technical relationship. Avoid that clients are subordinated to lawyers, because subordination increases a culture of poverty, of marginalization. And the narrative process is at the center, is at the core of a clinical approach, as narrating people's story is on one hand a legal strategy, but on the other is a cure for the client, especially for marginalized client. So our attempt is to shape a socio-clinical design of research and action based on a collective narrative approach to create a process where legally vulnerable clients, for example, asylum seekers, can familiarize with rules, with procedures, with expectations of local institutions in the host countries. And the other side, lawyers have to increase their sensitivity toward clients' everyday storytelling, thereby providing them with narrative skills in order to mediate their position with host society. This methodology of case analysis is rooted in different theories. Sociology of law, as Dirk said before, philosophy of law, legal theory, but also cultural psychology and anthropology. Francesca discussed before the notion of culture. We will see how cultural issues are really present in cases of migration laws. And on the other side, the specificity of this method is to work with legal files. So we do not just analyze the final decision of the judge, but we try to access the entire file of the client, and then doing interviews with clients and other legal actors, and doing observation in real context. So narrative became, in this framework, as a real tool for legal investigation. It's a method for analyzing legal conflict and see how meanings are negotiated among the parties. It is a framework to shape the client-lawyer interaction. It is a tool to shape judicial decision and contextualize the meanings of evidence. And finally, most importantly, a place for including and socialize excluded voices, as the one of migrants and the workers. So narrative, since 20 years, became scholars are aware that narrative is a real constitutive process in legal context. This sentence, stories construct facts that compress themes, is a turning point in legal studies, because we passed from a positivist approach according to which reality is given and facts are on the desk of the judge, to a constructivist approach. Facts are constructed in the legal process through the interaction among parties by using narrative shapes. So we adopt a dynamic vision of storytelling. Narration is a relational process. Narrative mediates a relation between people. People use narratives to make sense of their experience, to connect with the environment, to connect or disconnect with other people. The way in which stories are told matter in the legal process, which details, which characters. So moving from this methodological and theoretical background, I will show cases of asylum seekers because within the European and the Italian legal system, in order to be credible, the applicant's story must be coherent in itself and also coherent with more general information about countries of origin. This is a context where credibility is not given to the voice of asylum seekers, or telling the expected story is difficult when people are faced with lawyers, judges, and other professionals. So I will analyze two cases. The case of Amenze, who escaped from Nigeria to avoid a forced marriage. This case is important to show the gap between the personal and simple story told by Amenze and the tendency of the legal process to have stock stereotyped story, and also the capability of the lawyer in the end to create a new story based on gender and cultural issues. The other story, the story is of Margaret, is useful to me to show the lack of training of cultural mediators in this kind of interaction with vulnerable clients. This is the more general legal framework. I think that everybody knows the Geneva Convention, which provides the definition of a refugee. So the Italian definition is based on the Geneva Convention. Is a citizen of a non-European member state who, for fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, is unable or has a fear to avail himself of the protection of his or her country. And in our legal system and procedure is very important this rule about fact acquiring. Here we don't speak of truth. We are in a process where we speak of credibility. So the story of the asylum seeker when documents are missed is credible if the applicant has made every effort to describe the application and the declaration are considered as consistent and plausible and not in contradiction with COI. In the specific case of Amenze, as I told before, the problem is that the story is not trusted by the authorities. She arrives before the local committee and she in a very simple way, she says that she escaped from her country to avoid an arranged marriage. The committee raises doubt about the plausibility of this story, and the tribunal and the Court of Appeal confirm the committee decision. At the end, Amenze decided to hire another lawyer who is able to find the appropriate arguments based on gender issue, on the application of the Istanbul Convention. So these are except from the minutes of the committee. As you see, Amenze says simple things. My father wanted to oblige me to marry a friend of him. I went to stay with my aunt. My father drove my mother out of the house. My mother went to stay with her family. My father sent people there to check whether I was also there. So after this episode, my aunt said we should save money to leave for Latvia, as my father persecuted me and would not leave me alone. So here you see two negative decisions. On the left, we have the decision of the committee which says the story is not very credible, as the applicant has stated that she continued living in her father's house for 2 years. As you see, the arguments of the committee are not so strong anyway. And the other side, on the right, you see the arguments of the Court of Appeal, who speaks of private violence that cannot be related to the frame of the Article 1 of the Geneva Convention. What happened in the end is that the lawyer, the experienced lawyer, argues that Amenze escaped from Nigeria for well-founded fear of being a victim of gender violence, and this kind of persecution was not subject of any investigation by the court. The court failed to assess if the danger of a persecution related to gender identity in a context of endemic violence against women. And these arguments are winning because the Supreme Court found that the appeal was well funded, as the previous court didn't consider that the obligation to contract an unwanted marriage constitutes a serious breach of dignity and degrading treatment that integrates a serious harm. So, to summarize, Amenze's case shows how judgment failed to take into account Amenze's specific circumstances. It also reveals the gap between Amenze's personal story and simple story and the expected story by the committees. It also highlights the capability of the trained lawyer to construct an appropriate story. The conclusion is that this process could be achieved sooner by contextualizing Amenze's story as a socio-cultural product, mediating between diverse actor perspectives and representations. I will move quickly to the second case, the case of Margaret. It's also a typical story of a person coming from Nigeria as a victim of trafficking. I had the chance to attend to the process of identification of the victim. This process was undertaken by social workers in Naples. About the legal framework, it's interesting to say that according to our law, normally this kind of interviews have to be conducted by qualified and trained personnel at the presence of a cultural mediator. In fact, this kind of meeting was managed by a lawyer, Evelyn, and a cultural mediator, Barbara. They played different roles within these meetings. The cultural mediator acted as a guide. She explained to Margaret the importance to construct a good story. She says, we have to be very accurate in reconstructing your story. If we make a good job, we have a better chance of constructing a story that will lead to a happy ending. So feel free and relax. The lawyer plays a more technical role. She emphasized the importance of the travel and to reconstruct the pathway as an act of not free choice by Margaret. So she asked to return on the trips. She says, shall we go on a little part of this journey? In the second meeting, the questions of the cultural mediator became more intensive because Margaret resists. She's not telling the story. There are gaps to fill. So the cultural mediator make pressures. She say, what happens if you go back? In the third meeting, Barbara pressures Margaret to tell the story. She shows signs of impatience and discouragement. She speaks in Italian, ma che stiamo facendo? What are we doing? And then Margaret starts crying and tells the story. But I'm not sure that it was her story. She speaks in her dialect, so I couldn't understand. At the end, the cultural mediator summarized the stories in these two sentences. The madam, so the person who welcomed Margaret at the end of the travel, brings in 7 men every day and takes money for 3 weeks. So it means that Margaret again is arrived in Europe with the promise of an honest job, but she was obliged again to prostitution. Why is important this story? We see if we analyze the story, I analyzed this data with the collaboration of a cultural psychologist. And so from a dynamic perspective, we see a clear lack of understanding and respect for the quotidian and sociocultural storytelling. When Margaret says truth is inside you, she doesn't consider that truth is not inside you. Truth acquiring is a situated process. So Margaret seems to have not really the opportunity to tell her story and how she became aware of this process during the trip. Margaret's frustrations are visible, are credible in this kind of interaction. So why I analyze it in these cases? Because taking in account the problems connected to the solution of these cases, we proposed some clinical projects in order to empower legal vulnerable clients in legal settings. We just got a financial to develop this project entitled A Clinical Narrative Approach to Support Asylum Seekers in International Protection Procedures. And colleagues involved in this process have different background. I have a colleague from international law and from legal sociology. We moved from the awareness that in clinical design currently there are gaps, because despite the declaration of clinical scholars, in fact, there are little methodological analysis of how clinics might be designed to be agent of the transformation of the social world, and especially how include clients in case solution and more in general in public discourse. So the aim of our project is to provide support to vulnerable clients, but to involve them as active participants of the case solution. So this project is organized in two parts. In the first part, our aim is to construct a broader framework for case analysis based on the client story and not only on legal materials. And then to create a socio-legal framework where stories may be shared with professionals, and clients can become aware of the story and may be able to tell the story in a conscious way. So the idea is to understand how asylum seekers, for example, understand the legal framework. How do they become cautious of the expectations of the committees? How do they narrate their experience? And how do negotiate the meanings? Actually, currently we are in the phase of 1 and 3, identifying cases of international protection in collaboration with the Court of Appeal in Naples. And we are taking part to the audiences, and we are meeting asylum seekers. The next steps are to discuss these cases in a more general and collective framework. We imagine this kind of a situation that the idea is to move from the client story then to reach the starting story with other perspective and informed perspective on the case through a collective process of a story construction. The aim is to assess, to empower the client's capability to tell the story. The more general aims is also to rebalance position within the legal process between powerless and powerful legal actors, clients and the lawyers and judges. And also imagine that in the medium term, we will be able to shape new methods of case resolution based on this approach, collaborative approach that I mentioned at the beginning. The second project that I'm leading in collaboration with the UNHCR and other two Italian universities is the Statelessness legal clinics. We got funds, scholarship for students who will take in charge the solution of cases of statelessness people by seeking recognition also before the courts, obviously with the help and support of qualified lawyers and people from UNHCR. Okay, I will leave Francesca to continue with the project presentation.
Thank you, Flora. So this project consists in a murale we did with our students, an artist and street artist, and guys, so second generation of migrants, of a local NGO, Dedalus, which is involved in the process of legal processes of the international protection. During the class of the last semester, May 2021, students of the course of clinical legal education first have participated to a project of inclusion and urban requalification through the art. The murale depicts Aeneas and the ancient, the Greek, not Greek, the hero from Troy and his father Anchises, that can be considered as the first migrants of the Western classical story, the Greek tragedy. Under the supervision of social workers, students have listened to the young migrants' stories, explained them the different kinds of citizenship in Italy, jus sanguinis, jus soli, jus culturae, and students also have clarified them the national and European and international normative during international protection. These guys of migrants second generation talked about the journey, especially the journey their parents had to do to come from Africa, Eastern European and countries, and also from South America. So their stories were basically concerned the stories of their parents, of their family. Some of them lost their parents during the journey. So here there are a couple of images, and I would like to conclude also by pointing out the specific technique with the murale was realized. The murale, as we have seen, depicts two phases with the names of Aeneas and Anchises. Well, if you stay in front of the paint or in front of the murale, you cannot focus on the drawing, so you cannot see the face. You cannot recognize Aeneas and Anchises' faces. The only way to focus on and to see the two faces is to walk, to move. For us, it means that we all are migrants on this planet. So the presentation, we hope, has tried as be capable of proposing some critical reflections on the role of our university in time of globalization. We working with these migrants, listening to their stories, we have understood how culture is a strong issue, for example, and how culture can affect a story. Flora, for example, has explained the case of Amense, the story of Amense, how a story cannot be credible for a judge, for example. If you consider that for some of these persons, these girls, for example, a priority for a woman coming from Africa, for example, a forced marriage, is not credible for us, for people or young women living in the Western, in the European countries. Or, for example, we have listened to stories coming from African guys living in poor village without a registry office. So we learned about the age of these girls, these boys, only from their stories, because it's not officially established. So a cultural priority for them is not credible for us. It's not a cultural priority for our culture. And here the story is very important. The way in which we we can feel, and we can transmit, we can allow to our students to feel this vulnerability and to transform it in a legal vulnerability is very important. We think that is a point to be stressed, to be strongly dealt with by our training higher education. Our idea is that students must feel person's legal problem and translate the legal language in narrative stories. That's it for the moment.
Thank you so much, Flora and Francesca, for this presentation, for showing us or teaching us what the clinical legal education is, a sort of very hands-on approach for students to learn, and it's a beautiful mural, and I really like the idea of this sort of illusionary trick that you can only see the image when you move, when you're assessing mobility. And I'm sure it is also no accident that you chose the name of sort of the classical stories, again going back to narrative, but also going back to what we would consider as integral to European heritage. I mean, the Greek tragedies. I have taken so many notes, and I could ask so many questions because I work on narrative as well, and I can relate to so many things that you said. What the function of narrative is, what the function of positioning is. But I'm not sure if Dirk wants to start with a question.
No, I mean, let me first thank you. That was really interesting, and I really now understand what clinical legal education means. That's actually, it sounds like a fascinating approach. And as Silke just said, I mean, also we historians know something about narratives, of course, and I guess on the one hand, it's clear that also legal procedures are narrative by nature somehow, right? It's all about a specific story that people tell to the judge, and that also the judge or the court comes up on the other side then afterwards with its decision. But it's very interesting to put it forward like this, like you did it here in this context. So I was just wondering, is that I'm not sure if I understood that. Is that an optional part, so to say, of this? If I study law at Federico II, do all the law students go to this clinical legal education, or is that an optional part of it? And maybe I can add a second question, just to understand a little bit better the framework or the circumstances of doing all that in Naples in southern Italy now. I mean, just in terms of the presence of migrants also around the university or at the university. I mean, that's also a very, by the way, also a very pressing question that for us and also in Innsbruck, and I guess at many other places. I mean, how can we interact with migrants, with refugees? So and also for that, it seems to be a very interesting example. And maybe you can give us a little bit more about the circumstances under which you're doing that. I mean, in terms of presence and visibility of migrants and refugees in southern Italy and so on.
Okay, if you agree, I will start and then I will leave Francesca to complete my answer. Many thanks for your question, which leads us to contextualize our clinical legal training courses. It is an optional one. We are lucky because these courses arrive at the end of the curricula. We have students from the 4th or 5th year, so they are really skilled students, very well trained. They already know positive law. So with them we can do a brilliant work because they are really interested, as it is an optional course. Why this course has been created 5 years ago? Because in Italy, and not only in Italy, in Europe, more in general, this clinical legal education approach that was introduced in United States the last century arrived, has been increased in Europe after the Bologna reform, because especially law schools realized that our approach is too rooted in theory. So we needed to deal with practice, especially Italian law faculties have a real deep theoretical tradition. We are proud to have very good legal scholars, but these legal scholars came from a theoretical tradition. So the idea to increase clinical legal approach is linked to the idea to train our students with practical skills to leave us to analyze real cases, as Francesca told, to meet clients, human beings, and to live reality, enter in our law faculties, and to leave our students to go out our rooms. We go with them to follow audiences at the court. We meet real and many times legal vulnerable clients as we work in collaboration with the local actors. I mentioned Daedalus, this social cooperative based in Naples. So this is the more general framework. About the specific issues related to migration and refugee laws, I have to say that this is not the only possible issue to be analyzed in a clinical course. Obviously, I had a specific training in migration law thanks to my Swiss experiences, as I was affiliated to a Center for Migration Law for 5 years. So I developed a specific interest with this issue, but it's also true that this is a crucial time for migrants, especially arriving in the south of Italy. So maybe if Francesca agrees, I will leave her to continue on this issue, as Morales speaks a lot about the current situation in the south of Italy.
Yes, about the Duke's first question, I can only add that it could be hard to work to train students of the first years on these topics, because they don't still have categories, especially those concerning legal procedures. So students of the fourth and the fifth years have passed the exams like civil procedure, penal procedures, private law. So they have the theoretical categories to work, to understand, and also to work to these issues. About the second question and what Flora was saying, I mean, here I don't have a specific background on the issue of migration, but in the last couple of years, Mediterranean and the south of Italy have become the center of this phenomenon. So people coming from Africa, but also from South East, of Europe arrived here in south of Italy. So the issue, I think that the issue is important in general for the political agenda, not only here in Italy, but also for the European Union. And I think that two will be the most relevant issues for the political agenda, both at a national and a supranational context, the climatic change and the immigration issue. They are also linked because of the climatic change. Some places, some countries, for example, in the Africa sub-Saharan, we will have in the next decades places that where people couldn't live. So this problem affects also the problem of immigration, and so with my background, that is both of philosopher of law and of sociology of law. I had a master in Oñati in Spain at the International Institute of Sociology of Law, and a second master in Genova. I will try to combine these two myself, like a philosopher of law, which is based on the above all on positivist law, formalistic frame, with sociological aspects. So it has been easy to start to work to the migration because by attending to work that Daedalus and also Laici Terzo Mondo, that is another NGO working here in Naples with migrants, to try to manage to understand this phenomenon and to try to involve our students.
Can I ask a question about narrative, please? As I said, I can relate to many of the things you said, and I'm really curious about using narrative as a tool for legal investigation. And I think it is in Jerome Bronner's book, that The Minding the Law, that you cited as well, that he says that court cases are decided along sort of the quality of the narrative. So a good narrative, a good story brings you the happy ending. And you also said that. And I mean, we can ask, of course, what makes a good story, and you mentioned the plausibility and the coherence and the consistency. You know, this trope of the journey, that's also a well-established one. Heroes always, I say, leave home and they follow the quest and then they return home. So that's all very recognizable plots, and a recognizable plot makes, again, a good story. And I know that from the work of some colleagues who worked on narrative in legal cases, like Olaf Kleist and other people, the question is, of course, what makes a good story, what makes a convincing story in an interview in the context of forced migration or refugees. And you pointed it out that gender, can make a change. So, you don't tell the individual story, but you tell the women's fate, and that can make a difference in the court case. And I remember that sexual orientation is also one of those categories. And that means that we get quite a few structured stories along the lines of gender, of sexual orientation, but other reasons for migration are not so prominent. For example, poverty, which is one of the main reasons of migration. So that is sort of made invisible by the storytelling, because it's not, again, in quotes, a good story. And can you say something about this? What makes a good story, and sort of maybe the dangers of looking at it in that way?
Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful question, which contains a lot of other questions. And also, thank you for mentioning the Brunner and Amsterdam book. In fact, I was trained with Jerome Brunner's theories. I had the chance to meet him in person in 2006, and he was a good, very good mentor and friend for a few years. According to Jerry, yes, the story has to have an happy ending. I think that it's very important not just to lead to happy ending, but the very crucial point in this kind of procedures is the opportunity for the client to tell her story and this story. So how is possible within the legal framework, legal procedure, which is made of constraints, which has this pretension of objectivity and of neutrality, and where story is normally seen as not objective, as a subjective, and dealing with emotions. Really, the clinical legal education approach try to take inside all these parties, emotions, feeling, subjectivity, that have been cut off by positivism. So a good story for me is a story such the one of Amense, where the legal framework is appropriate, and where the story of the real story of the person deal with the legal framework. It doesn't deal with the committee expectations, but it's the real story of the person. So Amense at the end had a good judicial journey, because she had, thanks to the lawyer who mediated between her story and the cultural and legal system, she had the opportunity to tell her story, and not a stereotyped one, because the judicial process tends to stereotypes stories and issues, and to provide routinary decisions. So what is how to make the plot recognizable? I think that yes, the legal framework it's very important, but the coherence of the story, for me, it's a very crucial point, and you get this coherence according also testimonies of judges which interact with us. You get this coherence by listening and re-listening to the story and to the real voice of the person. The problem with the legal procedure is that it became really artificial. It is done on through document, and with document you miss people, you miss the story. So I think that a very important part of the legal procedure has to be dedicated to story listening and story hearing. So for me, a good plot is a plot that puts in appropriate legal terms the spontaneous story of the person, where spontaneous does not mean saying everything, but the idea of creating this socio-clinical space is to train the client to understand the questions of the committee, to put the spontaneous story in expected terms. You cannot ignore legal rules. You cannot ignore the institutional framework. And I think that we have a hard job to do, not just with clients, but with lawyers and with judges. So the clinical legal education course are basically dedicated to train better lawyers, lawyers capable with dealing with human stories, with the many aspects of a story. For example, gender issues. I think that it's not so obvious to speak of gender issues, of trafficking. There are not in Italy is as Francesca told. These last years, Italy had to face this challenge of immigrants arriving from Mediterranean and so on. For us as Italians, it's new. Italy is not like Switzerland, a multicultural context and country. We are just one language, not our lawyers, our judge not speaks 2 or 3 languages, not every day. I think about the other point, poverty. Yes, the aim of the clinical legal education is to put attention to poverty, to cases of marginalized people. But the question is which kind of lawyers could be interested to support this kind of cases. And this is the reason for which the law clinics has been created. I presented the second project, the Statelessness legal clinics. It has been supported by UNHCR to provide these people with the opportunity to have a technical advice. Otherwise, these people are lost in the world. As we have a big community of Roma people in Naples, and how to include this community in the larger city. There are important institutes, for example, a scholar institute who care young Roma, and they do their best to have these people integrated at school. So poverty means a lot of things, and the legal clinics has been created exactly for this reason, to sustain and reduce poverty, even especially in a big city such as Naples.
Can I add just 1-2 things? If Silke and Dirk, don't have other questions about this issue.
I think there's nothing at the moment, so please go ahead.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, just a second, because it's so interesting what you're saying, and it's talking about these narratives, right? I mean, you're not only training the lawyers, of course, but you're also training the judges, right? And it's so I was wondering, is it in contrast to what Silke said, right? Because there's of course the danger that you come up with the same stories again and again, because they are the ones that work in the courtroom, right? Isn't it more about, maybe not about the stories that are told, but about listening and learning to listen, and to listen even if the story is not the one that is easily to understand in our terms or in the courtroom, but to listen to the stories that the people come up with, and then to find the important points in these stories, and to bring them into a narrative that works legally.
listen to with empathy above all.
Yes.
I think that some judges are aware of this difficulty of listening different stories from different cultural background, and this kind of judges in Naples started to collaborate with us, and so it demands joint collaboration and effort to try to change judicial approach and the legal scholar approach more in general. For example, in one case, the Court of Appeal asked to us to analyze together the case and to do further investigation about COI, country of origin information, because the problem with international protection cases is that most decisions became stereotyped because judges try to deal the single story with the more general geographical, political, social context of origin of the applicant. And in doing that, the single story is not enough analyzed. So in one case, the court asked to us to do further investigation, and we discovered interesting things. For example, we discovered that the place of origin of the applicant didn't exist, and the committee wasn't able to realize that the applicant was lying in the end, and so it's really demanded an effort to contextualize this story, and the best way to provide specific decision is to do further investigation. According our jurisprudence from the Supreme Court is really, how do you say, avant-gardist, because they ask to the judges when there is some traces of violence, for example, to do further investigation. The question for the judge is then, how do we do that? We have to read the COI, which are in English and other languages. Italy do not have specific fact finders in country of origins. For example, Swiss people have 2 COI units which are independent, one at the level of the administration and the other one at the level of the courts. So they try to make to cross informations from different sources. Italy do not have this specific line of investigation, so we use more general information that are provided by ECR, EASO, and so on. So the question again, the issue again is to increase a better legal training in our law faculties. I cannot see other ways or to make training for lawyers, for legal professionals, more specific, because this is not also an Italian problem. I see even in Switzerland, migration law is a new discipline. At the University of Neuchâtel and other Swiss universities, there are courses of migration law. And this is enough recent. And so it means that lawyers are not, they do not still realize that migration law, statelessness law are specific issues, but not marginalized. to be a immigration lawyer, you have to know languages, you have to know specific legislation, you have to be able to deal with the notion of culture, with cultural diversities. So it's a challenge, it's a real challenge for our law faculties today.
Francesca?
Yes.
I think you wanted to say something, right?
Oh, it's okay. Thank you. Well, about the first question Silke made about the good story, I remember that when I studied English literature, the past life, I learned that the plot is the definition of plot. So the plot is the way in which the story is told. So I think that trying to add something to Flora said or already explained, that the problem is the way in which a story is told. And here we have problems because sometimes the story is not credible or according to our culture. So diversity is an issue very important in cultural terms. And here, I think it's important to stress the first two pillars of the clinical legal education, the theory of a case. We have tried to give a definition is the current and the detailed story, which is built by lawyer and clients, and which bring to a court. Often, as I told before, lawyers, but also judges, and before lawyers and judges, when we talk about the migrants or asylum seekers, we have also to talk about the local commission, which depend on the minister. So from Rome, and here we have a bureaucratic office where stories are only part paper. So stories are only, migrant stories are only another problem to be solved. So in Alessandro Manzoni novel, the betrothed, the Promessi Sposi, we had the person that we had Azzeca Garbugli, that was a lawyer who blindly applied law without any consideration for client. So this is the problem that, as Flora told before, we need to train students because they will become future professional social operators, social workers, cultural mediators, or lawyers, but we also need to train the lawyers and judges. And this discourse we have tried to do about migration can also be done about people with disabilities. For example, colleagues in Ferrara, at the University of Ferrara, worked with clinics concerning the rights of people with disabilities, or in Turin, where in other cities where colleagues work with the rights of people in jail, in prison. So the secret or the problem is trying to combine the story coming from a person in a legal framework, because for sure we cannot avoid to inscribe the story inside a legal framework. We cannot say, okay, we don't need, we need, but the point is how we apply, how we consider law, trying to take seriously stories, emotions coming from these persons, these human beings, their rights.
Okay, thank you so much for these extremely interesting insights into the work that you're doing in Naples, and I'm really grateful that we also had contribution from a law faculty, which is, we have to say, not very often the case in our, surroundings that happens. But it was really interesting, and it sounds really interesting. Silke, do you have anything more, or are we at the end?
No, I mean, I can just echo you. I think you're absolutely right. It's rare, but look, I mean, listening to the two of you, the law seems to be a narrative discipline, doesn't it? And
right.
It is all about and we also talk about interpreting the law. So maybe we should talk to people from the law faculty much more. It was definitely worthwhile talking to you today, and thank you so much for this contribution. Also for reminding us that there's diversity in narrative as well. So it's and also again for opening up the intersectional framework. This is not a migration law case scenario, so it can also be applied to other types of law. Now, thank you from my side, and I can only invite you to join us next week, where we have a colleague from Innsbruck here, Rina Aluri from Peace Studies, who will talk about terms of diversity and inclusion from her disciplinary perspective. Next Wednesday, same time, bring your own lunch, and see you soon. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks again to Naples.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.